an apartment, be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Always good to hit the notifications bell. That way you find out when I'm going to do one of these. So glad you all are here. So glad to talk to all of you. The way we do things on these streams is I give my opening remarks. Then from there, after I give my opening remarks, then I do the roll call. Then after I do the roll call, I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the stream. That's basically how we do it. So the way it's going to work tonight is I'm going to give my opening remarks. Then, and the whole time, I'll be writing down your super chat questions. Just writing them down. Just writing them down. After I write them down, then at that point, I'll do the roll call and then I'll answer them. So there you go. So opening remarks, roll call. So post this on Reddit, post this on Twitter, post this on social media, wherever videos are posted, Facebook, Bunker Chan, Prol Wiki, wherever videos are posted or menaced by the threat of international communism, Bicycle Repairman will be there to smash the commies. Marxism and dialectical materialism. Marxism and dialectical materialism. All right. Difference between. All right. Glenn Ford. Importance. Okay. Marxism envies the rich. Wow, they're just rolling right in. That's okay. I'll have plenty to talk about. So let me get started with the opening remarks. Folks, my opening remarks tonight are not going to be very long, but I always say that and then they end up being long. So let's see what happens tonight. But basically, folks, I wanted to bring your attention to an about that very, very few people in the United States know anything about. If you ask average Americans, about Nigeria, many of them probably don't even know Nigeria exists. Many of them, probably the ones who do, say it's a country in Africa. It's a big country in Africa. Maybe some people might know that Nigeria has quite a bit of oil. That's about it. Low proposal. Right. Proposal for an American Union. Most people wouldn't know much about Nigeria. They wouldn't really know much about it. But as somebody who follows the international oil markets like I do, as someone who has traveled around the world, I do know a little bit more than the average American about Nigeria. I don't know a vast amount, okay? Never been to Nigeria. But when I was in the Islamic Republic of Iran years ago, there were a number of students. Consequences of flippantly calling people fascists. No, it's not. No, it's not. All right. I was in the Islamic Republic of Iran. There are a number of Nigerian Muslims studying in Iran because there is a very, very, very big religious movement in Nigeria. It's called the Islamic Movement of Nigeria. And it is led by Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki. And Sheikh Ibrahim, MSM session with January 6th riots. It's led by Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki, and it is a Shia Muslim religious movement that is trying to unify the Christians and the Muslims of Nigeria. Nigeria is about half Christian and half Muslim. And the Christians in Nigeria and the Muslims in Nigeria do not get along with each other. There is a long history of civil war between these two ethnic groups. There was actually a war that went on, for many decades. They talk about Biafra and the Biafra War, and it was very ugly. And this is what the imperialists do, right? When the imperialists went to India, they reinforced the caste system. They played Christians and Muslims, and they played Hindus and Muslims in India against each other. And we need to get out of our heads this understanding of imperialism that is not an economic one. People talk about cultural imperialism. They make it sound like imperialism is when the West goes to developing countries and forces them to adopt technology and gets rid of their beautiful indigenous ways before technology. That's not what imperialism is. That's some weird Hollywood thing, okay? Imperialism is when Western capitalist countries go to the developing world and hold back economic development and keep the country in a state of underdevelopment economically. Keep the country lockdowns. Seldom. All right. And this is the nature of imperialism. Imperialism will go to countries in the developing world, and it will prevent them from developing modern infrastructure, modern technology, electricity, running water, and it will reinforce very primitive, barbaric political systems in order to justify its intervention. Saudi Arabia is a great example. There would not be the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia if it weren't for the imperialists. All across the region, the Arab people, look, our numbers, our Arabic numerals, right? They were doing numbers before we were, before we Europeans were. They were doing breakthroughs in astronomy and mathematics long before Europeans were. The Arab people have an amazing history. You can read about the Arab Enlightenment. And in Syria and in Iraq and in Egypt and in Libya and in Tunisia and in many parts of the Arab world, you've seen, modernization movements, socialist movements, Ba'athist movements, The only reason that Saudi Arabia exists as it does, as a very primitive, barbaric society that cuts people's heads off, that, engages in torture, that has an autocratic monarchy, the only reason the Saudi system exists, the Saudi autocratic regime exists, is because the imperialists prop it up. Right? The imperialists have propped up the Saudi autocracy. The British Empire found the House of Saud and said, we like these guys. They're going to keep Saudi Arabia as a place we can extract cheap oil. They're going to make sure that it doesn't become a modern, developed country. It remains, this place that has oil and sand, and we can keep our domination of the oil markets. And that's what the imperialists do. Right? I'm withdrawing some troops from Iraq. That's what the imperialists do, right? They go to the developing world, and they keep countries in a state of poverty. They reinforce sectarian divisions in the country. They prevent industrialization. They prevent the countries from building up their own industries and becoming competitors. They basically keep them as impoverished client states. That's what they do. That's how imperialism works. Imperialism is about holding back economic development, carving out the world as spheres of influence for big corporations. That's the nature of imperialism. And in Nigeria, the way that they have been able to, to keep that country poor, even though it has a huge amount of oil, the Niger Delta region in particular is very oil rich. The way they've been able to keep that country poor is playing Muslims and Christians against each other, right? There's this terrorist group called Boko Haram, which is now considered the African wing of ISIS. That has been committing horrendous atrocities. In the past, there's been various military juntas that have been Muslim aligned or Christian aligned, and this has been ongoing. So you have the Islamic movement of Nigeria which is a Shia Muslim movement inspired by the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Islamic Revolution of Iran that has been trying to bridge that gap and unify Christians and Muslims. And they had a lot of power. They had a lot of power in Zaria, which is a particular region. They call for economic justice. They condemn capitalism, and they've been trying to bring Nigeria together and try to build an anti-imperialist movement in Nigeria. So in 2015, right after Buhari was elected, for a long time, the president of Nigeria was Goodluck Jonathan, who was a Christian. He was voted out, and Buhari, who had formerly been the military dictator of Nigeria during the 1980s, he was elected as a president. This was seen as a victory for Muslims because Buhari is a Muslim. He got elected, and he'd been in office for a little bit, and the Iran nuclear deal had just been signed. And in response to the Iran nuclear deal being signed, the Saudis were not happy about the deal. So in Saudi Arabia, they executed Sheikh Namir al-Namir. I believe it was Ayatollah Namir al-Namir, who was the leader of the Shia Muslims in Saudi Arabia, who was fighting for their rights. And in Nigeria, you had the Buhari government send the military to Zaria to attack the compound where the leaders of the Islamic movement of Nigeria were staying. And it was a horrendous military assault, just a straight up military assault in Zaria in 2015. And they just stormed this facility, killed a number of people, just gunned them down. And they grabbed the leader of the Islamic movement of Nigeria, Sheikh al-Zakzaki, Ibrahim al-Zakzaki. And they've been holding him in military detention ever since. No charges. They just held him, basically. And many voices around the world said, you can't do this. You can't just grab a religious leader and hold him. And so the day after, Vax. The day after he was held, after he was detained, I protested outside the UN with a number of Shia Muslims from New York City. Hundreds of Shia Muslims gathered outside the UN, and I had just been to Iran, and I had met a number of these Nigerian students who were studying Islam in Iran. I listened to some of them speak. Some of these Nigerian students that were in Iran were speaking about the evils of imperialism and the evils of Zionism at some of the conferences I went to, and it was really an honor to be able to speak with these Nigerian students, a lot of whom spoke English because of, the history of colonialism and such, and so there's not many English speakers in Iran, so that's why I was spending time, and I was meeting some of these Nigerians. So, after this religious leader that so many of these, these Nigerian students studying in Iran were followers of, after he was rounded up by the Nigerian military, I was out there protesting in front of the UN. And there's actually a video of me protesting in the UN, outside the UN, where I gave a speech basically calling for freedom for Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki. And all over the world, people were marching in protest. Okay. Trot connection. Writing it down. All over the world, people were marching in support of Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki and demanding that he be freed. And he was very badly injured. And this is not a young man. This is an old man. And that he was held in military detention. Well, today, the charges against him, they finally did bring charges against him. Those charges have been dropped. So it appears that Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki is free. I mean, he's on his way home. And that's a victory because all over the world, people were demanding that they release him. So, it's a situation that I followed. Got no coverage here in Western media. None. I raised it at the United Nations. I was reporting from the United Nations at the time that it happened. I worked as a UN correspondent, and I confronted the UN, and the UN expressed deep concern about the military detention of Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki and the military of Nigeria moving against the Islamic movement of Nigeria and the Shia Muslim community. It appears now that Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki, the charges against him have been dropped. And so this is a big step forward. This is a very big step forward. But it goes to show you how much world events are connected, because it was like boom, boom, boom. Iran nuclear deal was signed, right? Benjamin Netanyahu was furious about it. Oh my God, the Israelis were mad about it. The Saudis executed Ayatollah Namir al-Namir, and then the Nigerian military attacked the Shia Muslim compound, and it was very much the fact that, because Iran is a Shia Muslim-led country, it's an Islamic republic, and because the Shia Muslims of the world, there's a spectrum. Not all Shia Muslims like Iran, right? Some Shia Muslims are very critical of Iran. Some Shia Muslims very much like Iran. There's a spectrum among Shia regarding Iran. But the fact that as soon as that Iran nuclear deal was signed, it was like boom, 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 right? They execute a top Shia cleric in Saudi Arabia. The military goes in Nigeria and attacks a Shia compound. It was big. I mean, and it shows world events are very, very closely connected. In the Islamic Revolution of Iran, and the oil markets and imperialism, and this is all very, very much connected. And it's our Marxist dialectical materialism that helps us to understand this, right? That helps us to really understand this. 2015, the oil prices were very, very low. Barack Obama and the Saudis, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, engineered a dramatic drop in the oil prices. And because of that, that created a squeeze on Iran that made Iranians very desperate for the Iran nuclear deal to go through. And I mean, and then, the Iran nuclear deal went through, but then the Israelis were angry about the Iran nuclear deal and all of this, right? Perspectives on new infrastructure plan. It was a pretty big moment. So, the fact that Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki is still alive after everything, the fact that he's alive and that the charges are dropped against him, this is a big step forward. This is a big victory for all the people around the world that have been following this case and raising this case. I mean, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. So I just wanted to use my opening remarks to really kind of highlight that situation because, again, all these things are connected, right? And Venezuela, the oil price drop that Obama engineered really devastated Venezuela. And Venezuela's big hardships started after that oil price drop. These things are connected. These things are connected. So it's been quite some time. It's now 2021. Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki, the charges against him are dropped. And really, this is an interesting moment. This is an interesting moment for the world. It's a big development. I just wanted to comment on that, really, for my opening remarks. It's not like, there aren't other topics in the world to talk about. You can talk about the escalation and the threats against Russia and China. You can talk about the U.S. economy and the inflation. I mean, the food prices are just, it's devastating people. You can talk about how Biden is beating the drums again, trying to say there's going to be Russian interference in the 2022 vote and trying to get us all scared of Russia. You can talk about how the U.S. Congress is playing up the January 6th. All right. Gruma coup. You talk about how the the media is kind of focusing on January 6th and trying to distract us with that. You can talk about the specter of Donald Trump, and there's a lot of issues we can discuss. But again, they are all connected, right? With our understanding of historical and dialectical materialism and Marxism and our understanding of the economic base, we can make sense of all of this. And that's really what we're trying to do with these streams, is we're trying to not just, talk about how we see the world, but, really teach a method for analyzing the world. Teach the Marxist method, right? The Marxist method of analyzing the world through an understanding of the economic base, through the understanding of the objective laws of how capitalism functions, the understanding of what imperialism really is, how imperialism is a global system of capitalism in its monopoly stage. It's with this understanding that we can understand different events, right? Marxism is very, very special. It's very, very special. Do you think China's rise, the new Cold War, will force the United States to implement more social, China's rise, force more social democracy? Um, and, you know, that's what I'm trying to do on these streams, you know. And I want to give a special shout out to the John Brown volunteers. They're doing great work. You're going to be seeing more of them. There's going to be some more social media of them. They've been going out and hitting the streets every day and doing outreach for the Center for Political Innovation. That's very amazing. It's really, really great work. Really, really great work. Yeah, I mean, I'm really proud of what they're doing and how dedicated they are. Why Russia wary of GMOs? Yeah, there you go. So I just, I mean, look, I mean, every day people are studying and learning Marxism, and look, people around the country are ordering copies of the CPI educational manual. We have this manual. We are city builders, and people, I mean, in Chicago, people are having classes on it. People are having classes on it in San Angelo, Texas. People are having classes on it in California. Somebody just ordered 8 copies of it today. They're in another part of California. People are using the Center for Political Innovation educational manual. We are city builders. They are using it to convene educational study groups to learn the Marxist method, to learn the dialectical and historical materialist method. And it's got, my essay, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age in it, but it's also got writings by Lenin. It's also got writings by Marx. It's got writings by Edward Bellamy. It's got 2 particular essays by Mao. It's valuable stuff. With Marxism, you can come to understand events like what's happening right now in Nigeria. So I wanted to highlight that case in Nigeria. It's a big deal in Nigeria, the fact that this very prominent religious leader was grabbed and has been held all this time by the military, now being released. That's a big deal. It's a really big deal in Nigeria. You wouldn't know anything about it in the United States. So I just wanted to highlight that for my opening remarks. And I guess, since it's late tonight, I guess now we'll just jump into the roll call. And then I'll start answering your super chats, and then we'll be done. So keep the super chats rolling in, and I will start answering your questions. So who's with us tonight? Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Christian from North New Jersey. Arturo from Alaska. Kinky is with us. Dylan Small in California. Ryan in Oakland. Nadia in East Harlem, NYC. Welcome, Nadia. Ryan in Oakland. Vancouver, Canada. Brothers Basement in College Park, Maryland. You're always welcome, Chaya. Glad you're here. JT24 in Mississippi. Elias in Wisconsin. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ohio. Itzel in Las Vegas. Austin, Texas. Alex. Jeff in LA. President Jesus in LA, Mechanicsville, Virginia, Temple City, California, David in China, Fairhope, Alabama, Clydebank, West Virginia, Pomona, California, Tristan in Maryland, shout out to you, Tristan, good friend of the program, Santa Clarita, Orange Duke, Kurt from Honolulu, Hawaii, Glendale, California, Poland, West Coast, Tamara, Carolyn, and Dario in Brooklyn, shout out to all of you, Los Angeles, hey, folks in NYC, if you want to get involved in things, shoot me an email because there's some local activities happening. There's going to be some events coming up, locally that you can come to like in person and all of that. So if you're an NYC local, shoot me an email. I'll let you know about some events that are happening. Tony from Tasmania, North Central West Virginia, John in Houston, Roberto in California, Nate from Sydney, Australia, New Zealand, South Island, James Thierry, Louis from Massachusetts, Todd in Seattle, Tennessee, Patrick in Florida, Quinn and Meredith from Washington State. Welcome, Quinn and Meredith. Carmen from Reading, Pennsylvania. Niger, Africa. Martin, Ireland. Waffles, Captain Waffles, Treasure Coast, Florida. Seattle. Jefferson, North Carolina. Solidarity from San Angelo. Great group of folks out there. The San Angelo Solidarity. They're a great group of folks. Excellent. Mohsen from Iran, Fresno area, San Miguel, Mexico, Pedro Castillo's inauguration. Yes, big victory. Ukiah, California, welcome. Utah, Western Massachusetts, Portland, Oregon, Timbuktu, Detroit, Rhode Island, Ha ha ha. A pun that I'm not going to read. Adelaide, Australia. Fairhope, Alabama. John in Denver. What are your thoughts on Napoleon Bonaparte and the Napoleonic Wars? All right. Very good question. Napoleonic Wars. All righty. Very, very good. North Macedonia, Lockport, New York. Grand Junction, Colorado. Jared from the United Corporations of America. Grand Traverse, Michigan. St. David's, Bermuda. Vinicius from Brazil. Jacksonville, Florida. Fort Lauderdale. Welcome, 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 welcome. Anybody else want me to call them out? Miami, Florida. Matthias Funes from Miami, Florida. Minnesota, Trash Pope, very good. All right. Ankara, Turkey, very, very good. Very, very good. Now, I am going to start answering your super chat questions. So there you go. First super chat question. The difference between Marxism and dialectical materialism. Well, Marxism is an overall worldview, right? And it has an application in specific areas, right? The economics of Marxism, Marxian economics, or that's one thing, right? Marxist view of history is called historical materialism, right? But the Marxist philosophy is called dialectical materialism, and that was the beginning of Marxism. Before Marx was a political activist, before Marx was an economist, he was a philosopher. He was a left Hegelian. He was a follower of Hegel, but he had an interpretation of Hegel that was a leftist interpretation that was in line with the movements of emancipation, striving for social equality that came out of the French Revolution. He was part of the left wing of radicals, radical intellectuals, and he interpreted Hegel and the Hegelian philosophy, to be in line with the left-wing movements of Europe, what they called the left, the people that wanted more social equality and were more radical and wanted to march into the future and believed in things like life, liberty, and the rights of man, etc. Marx was a left-wing intellectual, and he was a left Hegelian. Hegel had the concept of the dialectic, which was that history comes through conflict, right? That it's through the clash of different ideas that history is driven forward. It's the contradiction of ideas that drives history forward. And Marx argued, he combined the Hegelian dialectic, Oliver Cromwell in the English Civil War. He combined the Hegelian dialectic with the Greek tradition of materialism, right? Thought is inseparable from matter that thinks, right? That ideas are inspired by matter. Matter is not the result of ideas. Instead of saying, I think, therefore I am, we say, I am, therefore I think, right? The reason you think is because you have this piece of matter, this material thing in your head called a brain. That is materialism. Debunked, right? Materialism as opposed to idealism. Idealism says that, thoughts define the world. Classic idealism is the belief that the world was thought up by God, by some kind of God. That's the classic form of idealism. There are other forms of idealism, Other forms of idealism, the idea that thinking makes it so. Marxism says the opposite. It says reality comes first, and thoughts and ideas are a reflection of reality. So Marx took the philosophy of the Greek materialists, and he took the philosophy of the Hegelian dialectic, and he combined them into his own unique form of philosophy called dialectical materialism. It was the idea that all that exists in the universe is matter, but that matter is constantly in a state of motion and change, and it's through the contradiction and the clash that history moves forward. That is historical and dialectical materialism. I have often used the phrase A does not equal A. A does not equal A to demonstrate what dialectical materialism teaches. A does not equal A. A does not equal A because there is no way this first A could be the same as the second A, because everything in the world is constantly changing. Nothing is ever the same. That is the dialectical materialist worldview, and that is what Marx started out with. He developed first the dialectical materialist philosophy, From there, he got into politics, wrote the Communist Manifesto, participated in the German 1848 Revolution, was part of the Communist League, and eventually established the International Working Men's Association. And then from there, Karl Marx got into economics, right? Marx's life, he went into three phases. First, the philosopher, then the politician and political activist, and from there, the economist. That was Karl Marx. And Marx's final years were studying in London. He was in exile in London. And he studied. He went to the British Museum, where it was really the only place you could get hard data back then. There was no Google back then. So he went to the British Museum and spent lots of money. He lived in poverty, and with what little money he had, he went there and paid to get data basically handed over so he could do economic research and write Capital. That's Karl Marx. That's who Karl Marx was. And Marxism, like you asked the difference between Marxism and dialectical materialism. Marxism is all of everything Marx said. It's an entire worldview, an entire school of thought Marx started. Dialectical materialism is the philosophical side of Marxism, right? That's basically what it is. Okay. All right, next question. Glenn Ford on the importance. Yes, I tweeted out, I was very saddened that Glenn Ford has left us. That Glenn Ford, the editor of blackagendareport.com, has passed away. Glenn Ford was an amazing person. He was an African-American revolutionary, anti-imperialist, political organizer, who was very, very, I did not know him his whole life. I first encountered Glenn Ford in 2009, I think, 2009. I was speaking at anti-war conferences there where he was speaking, and I was reading his writings. I interviewed him a few times, and I read a lot of his articles. And I knew him as an anti-imperialist voice that was particularly angered by seeing Barack Obama as the voice of U.S. imperialism. blackagendareport.com, there's Margaret Kimberly, there's Danny Haifong, there's a kind of a circle of anti-imperialist writers and activists that associate with blackagendareport.com. Glenn Ford was very much the father of that circle. He was the inspirer of that. And, not afraid to call out Barack Obama, not afraid to defend Gaddafi and Libya, not afraid to, call out the prison industrial complex in the United States and talk about how there had been almost a white racist populist edge to building the prison industrial complex. And, wow. And talking about Gaddafi and talking about Syria, and he was really, really an anti-imperialist, really a revolutionary. He was a giant. And he played a very important role. And he's been, just like me, just like everybody else who is genuinely anti-imperialist, they dragged his name through the mud and called him a red brown and a Nazbol and every nasty name, anti-Semitic, but he was really a black revolutionary activist who was anti-imperialist through and through, and particularly wasn't going to fall for the Obama deception. It was really an honor to be in his presence. It was really an honor to interact with him. The few times I did. We're all going to miss Glenn Ford. One thing that I often quote Glenn Ford on is he refused to call Obama the lesser of two evils, and he would instead call Obama the more effective evil. I thought that was brilliant. He said Obama was the more effective evil, not the lesser of two evils. How can I affect change, right? How can I affect change living in a small city? So there you go. Glenn Ford, we're deeply saddened by his passing. A great man. All right, the next super chat question is, Marxism envies the rich. No. And this is what I've long tried to explain to people. Right? People have this caricature in their head. It really makes me angry. People have this caricature in their head that leftists, socialist, communists, we go around saying some people have more money than other people. That's not fair. that we're like children. We're like little babies, and we go around and it's like, it's not fair. He's got $1 billion. You've only got $10. It's not fair. It's not fair. Well, I mean, it isn't fair, okay? But that's like Karl Marx was not the first person to come along and say, by golly, some people having more than other people is unfair. That's unequal. That's not right. Something ought to be done about this. Something ought to be done to correct this. You know, I mean, people have been saying that for years. For years, people have been saying that. You know, for years, right? I mean, you know, there's the Catholic criticism of money, right? I mean, there's a reason they used to call money filthy lucre, right? You know, there was the Catholic, the belief that money was barren metal, it was sterile, it was a sinful property. Love of money is the root of all evil, in the Bible. And, there were many people, Sir Thomas More, was one early critic of money. It was basically, as they're breaking apart feudalism under King Henry VIII, you have Sir Thomas More, criticizing it and writing his book Utopia. There's many people have come along and said, hey, gap between rich and poor, gap between landowner and peasant, gap between slave and master, this ain't good. That's not Marxism. Right? That's not wrong. It's not wrong at all. It's absolutely true that the inequalities created by capitalism are unjust. The inequality of wealth, the inequality of opportunity. There's no question about that, okay? But that's not Marxism. Marxism was a scientific and is a scientific philosophy that analyzes how history develops. Right? It understands the trajectory of human civilization from hunter-gatherer civilization to slavery, to feudalism, to capitalism, and eventually leading to socialism and communism. It understands the nature of the capitalist system, how under capitalism production is carried out not for social use, but for profit. How this leads to gluts of overproduction because the worker cannot buy back the product he produces. It leads to the problem of the tendency of the falling rate of profit. Is the general law of capitalist accumulation, that it's expand or die. If a capitalist enterprise is not constantly expanding, it eventually dies. And, it understands that this can be resolved by the implementation of a centrally planned economy in which the means of production are organized to serve public good and not the profits of a few. Marxism is scientific, right? This is a scientific worldview. And, while Marxism may appeal to some of these feelings, like the feeling that it's unjust, that some people have more than others, that in itself is not Marxism. And no, Marxism is not the belief that we should just make everybody equal no matter how hard they work. That's not Marxism either. Marxism is the understanding that inequality and social hierarchy is rooted in scarcity. Let me repeat that. The goal of Marxism is not to make everyone equal. Rather, it's the understanding that inequality itself, social hierarchy itself, state repression, state coercion, the existence of the state itself, is all rooted in scarcity. And that by releasing production from the artificial restraints and inefficiencies imposed on it by production oriented for profit, getting rid of the irrational capitalist system and having an economy organized to serve public good and not profits, having the means of production operate rationally, can lift the artificial restraints on production and allow wealth to rapidly increase and expand to the point that we can then break down all inequality, all social hierarchy, all forms of oppression, and the state itself, right? That with rational central planning of the economy, the sky is the limit, and human beings can expand to a much better state of being beyond the irrationality of scarcity. Humans can finally be free from their weakness before nature. So people that say Marxism is about envying the rich, no, people were envying the rich. People were envying the rich ever since class society originated. And in the time in ancient Mesopotamia, where there were slaves and masters, there were slaves who didn't like the masters, and there would be slave revolts. Spartacus You know, he led a slave revolt. The slaves, you know, they envied the fact that their masters had all the wealth and they had to work, and the Spartacus got the slaves together and they revolted. In ancient Egypt, there were uprisings of the peasantry and of the slaves. You know, I mean, you can't, I'm sorry, but it's just like, no, I mean, no, 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 no. All right, one of the biggest weaknesses is economic literacy. Is the CPI going to put out a study manual more focused on economics? All right. CPI put out study manual more focused on economics. So this is what you need to understand. That you know, again, envy always exists. Envy always exists. Resentment against those who have more wealth and more opportunity always exists. Marxism is so much more than that. So much more than that. Marxism is the application of science to the understanding of history and to the creation of history. Marxism is dialectical and historical materialism. You know, there you go. Alrighty. Okay. AMLO proposed for Latin America, a Latin American Union. That would be a good thing. You know, I think that would be a good thing. There's the Organization for American States that already exists, which Cuba is banned from. And it would be a very good thing if there were a new body, a Latin American Union, through which the countries of Latin America could coordinate their activities, could engage with each other. You know, I think a new body like that would be good, and I think AMLO is a progressive. I mean, it's not, Mexico is not a socialist country. It's an anti-imperialist, you know, kind of coalition government. It's friendly to Venezuela. It's much more critical of the United States than any recent Mexican government has been. But you know, I mean, Mexico, it's a coalition, and there's different forces there, and I think AMLO is doing a pretty good job, relatively speaking. You know, he's trying to raise living standards in Mexico. He's trying to assert Mexico's economic and political independence from the United States. You know, the Communist Party, the Party of Labor, the Labor Party of Mexico is in the coalition with Morena. And, you know, I think this is a good idea, right? Having Latin American countries coordinate their activities would be a good thing. And having them talk to each other outside of the Organization of American States would be a good thing. The consequence of flippantly calling people fascist. Well, if you just label everybody fascist, ultimately what happens is the word fascism loses its meaning, right? And if everyone's a fascist, then no one's a fascist, right? And that's one of the problems with the bread tube world. Everyone's a fascist, and then no one's a fascist. On top of that, right, also that one thing that people don't seem to understand is that, you know, that calling someone a fascist is very much, it's a justification for violence against them, right? The argument in most left-wing circles is if someone is a fascist, it is okay to beat them up, it is okay to punch them, it is okay to murder them. So if you go out of your way to try and create the case that someone is a fascist, what you're doing, if you really go out of your way to play up the idea that someone is a fascist, you are trying to lay the groundwork and create the justification for violence against this person. And so, yeah, it's not a good practice. We should stop doing that, right? In left-wing circles, we should stop that, right? You know, we should stop that, right? I mean, you know, fascism, I'll just say what I've said many times before. There are 3 definitions of fascism that you get in left-wing circles, and all 3 of them are wrong. The first definition you get of fascism is your standard definition, which is fascism is the right wing. If they become more right wing and they become more authoritarian, we're moving toward fascism. There's creeping fascism, that we're gradually moving toward fascism. If the Republicans become more and more right wing and they become more and more, you know, authoritarian, they're fascists. Well, there's a grain of truth in that, but it's ultimately not the essence of fascism. Then there's the Trotskyite definition of fascism. Trotskyites say that fascism is a mass movement of the middle class. You know, it's middle class radicalism that is opposed to big corporations and opposed to the working class and the labor movement. Well, again, grain of truth in that, but that's not the essence of fascism. Third definition of fascism is that fascism is a capitalist attempt to imitate socialism, right? It's an attempt to, you know, to build a kind of more stable and authoritarian capitalism, they sound like socialists, but they ain't. Then they're fascists, right? And that, again, there's a grain of truth in that, but it's wrong. The essence of fascism is this: fascism is a mass movement of violence and terror. It is a mass mobilization of society for violence, terror, and destruction in the hopes of stabilizing capitalism. That's basically what it is. Fascism is when, in order to try and stabilize the capitalist economy, one section of the capitalist class takes power, takes control of the government, and once it takes control of the government, mobilizes mass violence and terror and destruction in the hopes of stabilizing capitalism. And that's what Mussolini did. That's what Hitler did. That's what the Ku Klux Klan did. That's what the Black Hundreds Party in Russia did. That's what Pinochet did. That's what Franco in Spain did. It's when one section of the ruling class seizes control of the state, mobilizes mass violence and terror in the hopes of stabilizing capitalism. And basically, fascism is, there is no fascist ideology, right? There is no fascist ideology, right? The Nazis were talking about knights and castles and swords and Wagner, and they carried out mass violence and terror in order to try and stabilize capitalism. The Italian fascists were talking about futurism and science fiction and the glory of speed and all kinds of stuff, but they were engaging in mass violence and terror, and repression, try to stabilize capitalism. Pinochet was talking about one thing. Franco in Spain was talking about another thing. It doesn't matter what they say. Fascism, it does not matter what they say. Fascist ideology, it doesn't really, at the end of the day, doesn't really matter what they say. It's about what they do. And what they do is mass violence and terror in order to try and stabilize capitalism. And that's fascism. And there you go. I mean, that's what fascism is. And when you start trying to look for a fascist ideology or a fascist aesthetic or a fascist teaching or a fascist hand sign or a fascist code word, you miss everything, right? There are all kinds of people that are racist that are not fascist. And there are fascist movements that are not racist, right? I mean, the Italian fascists, for example, while Nazi fascism was all about anti-Semitism and carried out the Holocaust and all of that, the Italian fascists had many Jewish leaders in the government who were sympathetic with them. The Pinochet regime, while they were racist, I believe, against like indigenous folks, they didn't seem to. So it's complicated, right? But ultimately, there is no fascist ideology. There is no fascist. There is no fascist, belief system. Fascism is a mass movement of violence and terror to stabilize capitalism on behalf of one section of the capitalist class that utilizes the state in order to do it. That's what fascism is. And that is a scientific understanding. And if you read R. Palm Dutt and his very important book, Fascism and Social Revolution, he gets into that. And that, basically, that's what fascism is, and that's that. So there you go. Alrighty. The current website for the Center for Political Innovation, is cpiusa.org. No dash. cpiusa.org. That's the current website. We removed cpi-usa.org. We no longer use that website. Now it's cpiusa.org. So that's, sorry for the confusion there. All right. The mainstream media is obsessed with the January 6th riots. I mean, well, first of all, to be fair, the January 6th events were pretty big. It's a big deal that, that a bunch of, Trump supporters ran inside to the, the Capitol and were destroying things and trying to prevent a vote that was happening. That's a big deal. So it's worth talking about. Why is Nancy Pelosi putting on this show in front of Congress? It's again, it's about keeping it on Trump. Biden's been in office, since January. Things are not really getting better in the country. There's, inflation, the price of food is going up, people are unhappy. The economic fallout of the pandemic is continuing to go on. And so if we can focus on bad Trump, it's a way to distract from, the fact that the Biden administration is having a little bit of a hard time getting their shit together. That's my feeling about it. But, you know, I've said this before, right? You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And I will continue to keep covering Nigeria. I mean, there you go. But, um, you know, I've said this before, but it's like January 6th is going to go down in history, I think. I mean, look, we don't know about to what role the FBI. I mean, the fact that FBI informers were everywhere and they didn't stop this from happening and they didn't inform people, like something's up there. And it's like, why did the police just let people go in? Like, you know, I mean, I've been to protests in D.C. and, you know, I mean, if me and a crowd of anti-war protesters had tried to do that, they wouldn't have let us get, you know, anywhere near that. So that's a little bit sketch. But that said, right? And I've said this about January 6th, and I will say this again. Whoever thought of this, it's going to go down in this is going to be one of the most epic blunders in history, right? Whoever the Trump campaign guy, you know, Donald Trump did say, "I'll meet you at the Capitol," never showed up. You know, whoever it was who had that idea is just going to go down in history as an idiot. Okay, you know, I imagine, right? You know, J.K. Rowling was going around to different publishers. You know, and there was somebody sitting there. You know, she handed them the Harry Potter manuscript, and there was, you know, she went to many different publishers, and there was some guy who got it, and he said, "Muggle? What's a muggle? This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Get out of here, J.K. Rowling." And then he saw what happened and, you know, felt like, oh, I'm the stupidest man in the world. You know, George Lucas had Star Wars, right? And he went around to a lot of different Hollywood studios, and there's a guy smoking a cigar. What is this? You know, is this a cowboy movie? Is it science fiction? We got, you know, Jedi Knights? What is this? It doesn't even make any sense. This is dumb. Luke Skywalker. What kind of name is Skywalker? This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Get out of here, George Lucas. Get out of here. Right. Well, you know, that guy feels kind of like an idiot. And so I do imagine that, you know, that there was like a meeting somewhere, and like Donald Trump and his staff were sitting there, and he's like, "Oh my God, we lost the election. What are we gonna do? How are we gonna get out of this one? How are we gonna get out of this one?" And there was a guy who said, "I know. We'll say we won it anyway." Will that work? We'll just say we won it, even though we didn't? Oh, wait, hear me out. We'll just say that we won it anyway. And then, right before they take the vote to certify the election results, we'll have a bunch of rednecks put on silly buffalo costumes and run around inside the Capitol and pee on things and break things. That's genius. That is genius. This man is a genius. I'm going to be president for 4 more years. Oh my God, this man is a genius. This man is a genius. Listen to this guy. Find the rednecks. It'll work. I mean, seriously, you know what I mean? I mean, this is the dumbest thing. I mean, it's like, did anyone think that what happened on January 6th was going to stop, you know, was going to help Trump in any conceivable way? I really, like, that is going to go down in history as one of the dumbest things, you know. Allie Hawkins. All right. That is going to go down in, you know, in history as one of the dumbest decisions in political history. It was like, it hurt the Trump movement. It hurt Donald Trump. He had that video afterwards. He's like, "Folks, go home now." I mean, it's just like, what? Like, I don't know. I think the Donald Trump movement pretty much shot itself in the foot. And the question is, to what extent, you know, did people help them shoot themselves in the foot? I think, there was some shady stuff that went on, FBI informers, people live streaming, and there's a lot of questions, but whoever thought that was going to be a good idea, you know, Donald Trump saying, "I'll meet you at the Capitol." I mean, that was it. So there you go. All right. You know, lockdowns are seldom analyzed from a dialectical materialist perspective. Look, working class people have been devastated by this. A lot of rich people, you know, have been okay during the whole lockdown thing, but working class people have lost their jobs, have had, you know, I mean, just gotten desperate. And the fact that that working class people don't trust the government, are economically desperate and frustrated by this, and there's no sensitivity around it, right? And look, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm vaccinated. I don't think COVID is a hoax. COVID is definitely real. But I'll just be real. I mean, the fact that people are suspicious and don't trust the media, the fact that people are angry to see the economy devastated by all this, I mean, there's no sensitivity. It's all just like, oh, are you a stupid conspiracy theorist? There's no sensitivity, right? And that's a problem, right? And I mean, let's talk about how, the beneficiaries of this pandemic have been Walmart and Amazon and Jeff Bezos and, but average working people's lives have been destroyed, small businesses have been destroyed. Let's talk about all of this. I mean, there's no sympathy for that. It's all just, oh, if you have any questions, if you're not happy about the lockdowns, you're a stupid conspiracy theorist. No, a lot of people's lives have been destroyed. A lot of people's lives have been destroyed, and the media does lie all the time. I think in this case they are not lying. I don't think COVID is a hoax, and I think the vaccines are fine. But does media lie? Yeah. Do big drug companies lie? Yeah. So people who think that, no, I don't think we should, castigate them, and I don't think we should, say, oh, you're canceled. No, I think we should talk about what working people have been through. The lockdowns ultimately show the necessity of socialism. The fact that China and Vietnam and Kerala district in India and Venezuela and Cuba and all of them handled this amazingly compared to the Western capitalist countries shows the weakness of capitalism. The health of one is the health of all. Okay, I mean, the free market, every man for himself, every corporation does whatever is profitable. You can't handle a society-wide problem like a pandemic, you know. Oh, that's a good one. You can't handle a society-wide problem like a pandemic with that approach. You just can't do it. Anarchists serve U.S. hegemony. You just can't do it. So there you go. All right, next question. Biden withdrawing some troops from Iraq. I maintain that Biden comes out of the Brzezinski school. I mean, that's where Obama, studied, Columbia University, Center of Anti-Communist Studies. That's, Biden, the Obama administration, after they got rid of Hillary Clinton and brought in John Kerry as Secretary of State, they focused on the Iran nuclear deal and normalizing diplomatic relations with Cuba. And that I maintain that they are from the Brzezinski foreign policy school, that they want the USA to look like it's withdrawing, like it's a softer country, while escalating the use of proxy forces. That is the strategy of the late Cold War pioneered by Brzezinski. Jimmy Carter, the peace president, right? Try to, somebody take care of this problematic people in the chat. Come on. But you know, uh, you know, my feeling is that this is, it's from that school of thinking where it's like, we'll try to make the USA look like it's withdrawing and retreating while escalating the use of proxy forces, while manipulating different anti-imperialist states against each other. That's my feeling. That's my feeling of what's going on here. And so, yeah, make the USA look like it's retreating while we escalate things like the color revolution, destabilization in Cuba, etc. All right. Anti-vax is first world privilege. No, I don't think it's that. I really don't think it's that. I don't think it's that. I think it's that it's, again, working class people don't trust their government. The government of the United States lies all the time. Working people are getting screwed by this pandemic. Rich people are fine. And so, yeah, I don't blame working people for being suspicious, right? I think I think that, no need repeating that. All right, NAMBLA Trot connection. I'd never heard that about NAMBLA's founder being a Trotskyist, right? NAMBLA is this pedophile group or whatever. My understanding, though, is that the Spartacist League, which was is a major, one of the major Trotskyist groups, the Spartacist League, takes the position that age of consent laws should be gotten rid of and has defended NAMBLA and marched alongside NAMBLA in the past. And that trot groups that are from the Spartacist trajectory, like the Internationalist group and the International Bolshevik tendency, also take that position. There's one wing of Trotskyism that is pro-pedophile, and that is, like there's a wing of the Orthodox Trotskyists, a particular wing of the Orthodox Trotskyists that take positions like that, and that's disgusting, and I oppose that. Children cannot consent. Period. No one should be doing sexual things with people under the age of 18, and that's a disgrace to Marxism and leftism, and I oppose it. Now, I have, again, people take clips out of context to try and make me look bad, but I have many times been asked, not many times, a couple times I've mentioned that, okay, so it's like, again, they want leftists to be stupid. They want us to not talk about things with any depth, right? But it's worth talking about, okay? So there's a bigger issue here. Trot groups, who cares what Trotskyists do? Whatever, right? They're doing whatever. But like the whole NAMBLA thing, right? There was this pro-pedophile group, and I guess they still exist, right? Or do they? Or I don't know. There was this pro-pedophile activist group, called NAMBLA, that existed in the 70s. And they were allowed to participate in the gay parades, right? And then in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, the gay rights movement as a group said, no, this isn't okay. Get them out of here. They're advocating child rape, and they need to go away. And that was the right decision. But until then, there was some confusion about it, right? There was some confusion about it within the gay rights movement. And it's a very sad thing, but unfortunately, at a time, prior to the 70s and prior to the 80s, right? Prior to the modern gay rights movement, there were many gay men who grew up thinking they were the only gay person in the world. And that changed when their teacher, their coach, their priest molested them. And so based on that, they had a good feeling about a child sexual abuser. And it's really, 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 really sad, right? It's a really, really sad thing that this happened, right? Because child sexual abuse is a horrendous thing. But because all homosexuality was so taboo and never discussed, there was confusion about this in the early gay rights movement. It's a really big tragic thing. And as there started to be awareness about gay rights, and as there started to be an understanding, that changed. And now the gay rights movement overwhelmingly says, no, pedophiles, NAMBLA, they're not welcome in our ranks. They're not welcome. They're not allowed to be part of this. This isn't okay. But before that, there was confusion around it. And you have to also remember that there used to be a lot of confusion. A lot of people associated male homosexuality with pedophilia. They didn't understand the difference, because the only time anyone ever heard of gay people back in the 50s and back in the 40s and 20s, the only time people ever heard of gay people was when they'd arrest some guy for molesting little boys or something. People didn't understand that homosexuality and pedophilia are two different things. There was no understanding of that, because, again, the only time you ever heard of males being sexual with other males was when they would arrest some child molester or something. So because of that, there was confusion. But it was through, the modern gay rights movement that confusion went away, right? And again, I have talked about, this is a historical fact, and it's worth talking about. It's absolutely worth talking. This happened, right? And it was a big deal. I can show you the news articles from the 90s when the modern gay rights movement said, pedophiles, you're not welcome at our marches. And that was a good thing, because it showed that the consciousness was changing, etc. These are historical facts, okay? I am talking about historical facts. And the fact that a certain person, who I will not name, took a clip of me talking about this and tried to make it sound like I was saying all gay people were pedophiles is unbelievable. I mean, it's really unbelievable, and it should show you what a lying scumbag this person is. And, the fact that he took a clip out of context, right? Out of context, and tried to make it, these are evil people. How can anyone look at this person and think that they are an honest person? That they would take me talking about historical facts. It was from a conversation I was having with somebody about Milo Yiannopoulos, who made, crude, awful statements about pedophilia. And I was putting those statements in the context of historical facts and the debate. They took this clip and tried to distort it, right? It shows that these people are not interested in engaging with facts. They're not interested in engaging with ideology. They are just maniacally evil cancel culture artists, right? There are probably some mysterious patrons that, hand them cash every time they do it, right? If you know who the person is who did this and you still listen to them, look yourself in the mirror and say, why am I listening to this person? If someone is that dishonest that they will take a clip of Caleb saying historical facts, take it out of context to try and make it look like Caleb's saying something completely different, right? Around a very sensitive issue like this, mind you, right? If they will do that and you still listen to them, you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, why am I doing this, right? No one should ever listen to that person ever again, right? And you'll notice this person did not get a mention in my book on BreadTube because they have never said anything of substance, right? In my BreadTube book, you have to respond to ideas. All this person does is play clips of people they don't like and laugh at them and make fun of their physical appearance and all of that. Nothing they said has any value. They're simply like an internet cyberbully, okay? And there's nothing of value the person has ever said or ever done, right? They're just, in my book, I did talk about, some of the things Vosh has said. I talked about some of the things that Skippy the Bear has said, some of the things ContraPoints has said. This person got no mention whatsoever because they haven't said anything. All this person does is just character assassinate. That's all they do. It's personal attacks, character assassination, lies, out of context. People like that are not worthy of your attention. And anyone who watches this person's content, again, why? What do you get out of this, right? I could do this to anybody. I could play somebody else's clip and pause it and go, oh, that's, or pause it and say, oh, what they mean. Anybody could do that. You could do that to anybody. You could say, it's dumb, all right? So enough attention there. But yeah, there are some of these trot groups. The Spartacist League, the Internationalist Group, the International Bolshevik Tendency, they do take this position on NAMBLA, and that's reprehensible. And Allen Ginsberg, who's respected as a very good poet of the Beat Age, he took those positions. That's reprehensible. It's just reprehensible. What is there to say about it, right? Children cannot consent if you're not under the age of 18. That's it, right? Now, so there you go. End of discussion. All right, perspectives on the new infrastructure plan. Again, let's see what actually gets done. A lot of what Joe Biden has proposed looks good on paper. I know Congress just passed, an infrastructure plan. Let's see what happens, right? When I see stuff actually happening, I'll be happy about it. Did the USA cause the Nkrumah coup? Yes, generally it's understood that the USA was opposing Kwame Nkrumah. Now, John F. Kennedy met with Kwame Nkrumah and was trying to move him, less solidly into the Soviet camp. But then Kwame Nkrumah wrote his book, Neo-Colonialism, the Highest Stage of Imperialism, or the Last Stage of Imperialism. It was kind of rallying anti-imperialism. At that point, the United States said he needs to be removed. And from what I understand, his book, Neo-Colonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism, was a main motivator for the coup. They felt like he had to be removed because of that, because that was just too much. And that's a very biting anti-imperialist book that Nkrumah wrote. Nkrumah was a great African anti-imperialist leader. Kwame Nkrumah, African socialism. Yeah, there you go. Will China's rise force more social democracy? Well, it's not just China's rise. It's the economic crisis of capitalism, right? The fact that China is rising and it's leading a block of anti-imperialist countries, and there's an economic crisis in the United States, is going to put the U.S. ruling class more on the defensive. That will create an opportunity for working people to, win more great victories against the imperialists and win things, like healthcare and jobs and education, etc. There's more opportunity for that. Uh, but at the same time, again, the imperialists also get more vicious. And I mean, we should be, the threat of nuclear war, I mean, is hanging over our heads. I mean, and that's something to be concerned about. Alrighty. But yes, why is Russia wary of GMOs? Well, look, I don't speak for Russia, so I can't tell you. I really don't know. I don't know why. I do know that there are many, many, Russian voices that are critical of GMOs. I can tell you what I think, though. The thing is, I am not opposed to GMOs as a concept. There's nothing inherently wrong with genetically modified foods. What there is wrong is there are companies like Monsanto that I do not trust. Monsanto is an evil corporation that is known to violate people's rights, right? And so we cannot trust Monsanto. We cannot trust big corporations, but we can also say there's nothing inherently wrong with GMOs. We just don't trust that, Monsanto is telling us the truth and when they reassure us that they're safe. There's nothing wrong with nuclear power. There's something wrong with, nuclear power companies, and we might not trust nuclear power companies, but, there's nothing inherently wrong with nuclear power. Right? And that's the important thing. Marxists are not anti-science. Look, if there's a way to genetically modify foods in order to make them, more exciting, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Israelis are entitled to their country because they were there. All right. Israelis. There's nothing wrong with that, but we don't trust capitalist corporations that lie all the time when they do these things. That's the point. Okay. The Napoleonic Wars. I don't talk about my job. Come on, man. Come on. All right. Napoleonic Wars. What is it? Napoleonic Wars. So, Napoleon. Okay, so you have the French Revolution, right? The king is executed, the National Assembly is created. You have the Terror, the Reign of Terror, Jean-Paul Marat, and Danton, and you have that, and the Thermidor, and it's kind of chaos. And so then Napoleon marches into power, and Napoleon declares himself, the leader of French society, and eventually crowns himself emperor. And the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon refers to himself as the Revolution in Boots, and he's marching. He creates a meritocracy, and he creates a meritocracy, and he marches across Europe. And as he marches across Europe, he brings the property change of the French Revolution, right? I mean, that's why a lot of various intellectuals think he's a good guy, because he's bringing the French Revolution and its values across Europe. He calls himself the Revolution in Boots. He marches into Prussia and other places, and he's bringing land reform, and he's liberating people from the monarchies, and trying to push kind of the values of the French Revolution, across Europe. But at the same time, I mean, he's also, he's plundering people. It's not like he's doing this for selfless reasons. It's not like he's, sitting there and saying, oh boy, I just want to go help the people of Europe and bring them into the 21st century. Of course not, right? He's bringing a higher form of civilization, the capitalist property relations across Europe. But at the same time, he's doing it. He's building an empire. He calls himself the emperor. He then makes the mistake of messing with Russia. And there's a lot written about Napoleon's invasion of Russia. In fact, there's the 1812 overture, right? When I was a kid, we always used to think the 1812 overture was patriotic. It was about the War of 1812 in the United States. No, the 1812 overture is about Napoleon invading Russia and getting his ass handed to him by the Russian people. There were some peasants in Russia that hated the landlords and hated the landowners, and so they welcomed Napoleon's invasion. But most Russians felt like, okay, we may not like the landlords, we may not like feudalism, But you know what? This is our country, and Napoleon needs to get the hell out of here. And that's what War and Peace, the book, is about. War and Peace is about how, there were some people who felt conflicted because they saw Napoleon as a modernizer. But ultimately, the Russian people decided that they loved their home and they loved their land and they loved their country. And they were going to repel the invasion. And they drove Napoleon out of Russia. And Napoleon got defeated. In 1812, he was driven out of Russia, right? And that, Napoleon, in some ways, he was a progressive, and that he was trying to, breaking apart feudalism and bringing modern values, but he was a brutal colonizer and an imperialist, I mean, I guess he wasn't an imperialist, but he was an empire builder. He wasn't an imperialist in the Leninist sense of the term. That kind of capitalism hadn't developed. He did believe in a more state-controlled form of capitalism. His economic writings talked about the need for heavy government regulation of industry and government funding of things like scientific research. He was very critical of the British model of free trade. He was very opposed to Adam Smith and some of the economic ideas that later came to define global capitalism, and I think that's particularly interesting. And when he called out, I believe the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about the Rothschilds come from Napoleon. Napoleon was the first one to start promoting, the Rothschild anti-Semitism theory, and obviously that's not good. But I think he fit that into some of his economic critiques of the British Empire. But yeah, Napoleon, he's a complicated figure. For his time, he was a progressive. But he pretended to be a Muslim in order to conquer Syria and Egypt. Again, that's a story a lot of people don't know, but he pretended to be a Muslim because he thought that would help him colonize Syria and Egypt. And he put up posters everywhere proclaiming that he was a Muslim in order to try and get the Arab people to support him. Napoleon is a strange figure. He's from the island, I believe, of Corsica, right? He was somebody who was a dynamic military leader, very charismatic. He knew how to organize people and mobilize things and get things done. But he was also kind of a mass murderer and a psychopath. And he's an important figure in the history of the world and the history of France in particular, and the history of Europe. He's a very important figure. What I think is interesting about Napoleon is that, if you're French and you're like, you know what, I like Napoleon, everyone's kind of okay with that. People are like, okay, well, you don't like the racism and you don't like the wars, but you respect him as a great statesman. That's cool, right? And if you're British and you're like, you know what, I like Winston Churchill, everyone's okay with that. And they're like, okay, well, all the mass murder and famines in India, you don't like that. And, all the racism you don't like. But, you respect him. He defeated the Nazis, great statesman. Everyone's okay with that. If you're an American and you're like, you know what, I like George Washington. Everyone's okay with that. They're like, well, I'm sure you don't agree with slavery and killing Native Americans, but you respect George Washington, the father of our country. Everyone's fine with that. But if you say, I'm a communist and I like Stalin. What? You like Stalin? Right? If you say, hey, I'm a communist and I like Mao. What? You like Mao? I mean, it's ridiculous. Why is it okay to like Napoleon? Why is it okay to like Winston Churchill? Why is it okay to like George Washington? But it's not okay to like Stalin, and it's not okay to like Mao, right? Stalin and Mao did bad things. And so did Napoleon, and so did George Washington, and so did Winston Churchill. And if I'm allowed to like Winston Churchill and not get canceled, if I'm allowed to like George Washington and not get canceled, if I'm allowed to like Winston Churchill and not get canceled, I can like Stalin and not get canceled, and I can like Mao and not get canceled. And this ridiculous double standard, I'm so sick of this. I'm so tired of this, right? Anti-communism is predicated on this bias. Stalin did nothing good ever. All he did was kill people his whole life and make everybody miserable. Mao did nothing good ever, But, Winston Churchill, yeah, sure, mass murder and colonialism and, racism, but, he defeated Napoleon, yeah, sure, killed a lot of people, started, but, George Washington, slavery, colonial, yeah. I mean, I'm tired of this. Where's the double standard here? I mean, I'm sorry about this, but if you get canceled, if you're, I had this debate with Stefan Molyneux, and I called him out on this because he tried to pull this crap with me, right? Oh, the Soviet Union was a murder factory. Yeah, no. Western imperialism is a murder factory. Look, we can learn from what Stalin did right and oppose what Stalin did wrong. We can learn what Mao did right and oppose what Mao did wrong. We can learn from what George Washington did right and oppose what George Washington did wrong. We can learn from what Winston Churchill did right and oppose what he did wrong. We can learn from what Napoleon did right and oppose what he did wrong. There's things we can learn from Napoleon, right? I mean, Napoleon, like I said, he was the revolution in boots. He marched the ideals of the French Revolution across Europe. He had economic writings critiquing the British model of free trade. There are things about Napoleon, despite all the bad things like colonialism and brutal crimes against the people of various places he colonized and the Arab people. There are things about Napoleon that, despite all the evil, we can learn from. Same from George Washington, right? George Washington, not a good dude, but, are there things from his writings and speeches and we can learn from? Sure, right? There are things we can learn from. But, if we're allowed to take the good and leave the bad with Winston Churchill and with Napoleon and with George Washington, why can't we do that with socialist leaders? Why is there this assumption that Mao and Stalin and Fidel Castro never did anything good in their whole lives? And anyone who says that is a wingnut and an extremist and a lunatic. No, why can't we have a critical assessment of this? Why can't we admit that, yeah, Napoleon did a lot of bad stuff, but there's some good things there. Winston Churchill did a lot of bad stuff, but there's some good stuff there. George Washington did a lot of bad stuff, but there's some good stuff there. Why can't we have an assessment of what the socialist countries did? It's racism. It's Eurocentric racism. If a leader existed in Europe, must have been good. If a leader existed in the developing world, oh no, he's bad. That's really all it is. It's West is the best. It's the Proud Boys. West is the best. West is the best. That's Vosh should make that, his mantra. He should just get on there. He should wear a Proud Boy uniform, and in all of his streams, he should just chant, West is the best, right? The same with, Skippy the Bear. All of them should go join the Proud Boys and just say, West is the best, because that's what they believe. When it really gets down to it, they think West is the best, right? They think that the Western capitalist societies of the United States are superior to the anti-imperialist countries, and that's what they believe, right? So there you go. All right. Oliver Cromwell and the English Civil War. Again, there's another figure, right? Oliver Cromwell is generally remembered in a rather negative way in English history. For good reason. Genocide against the Irish people. Mass murder of Irish people. But the main reason he's hated in English history is because he beheaded King Charles, right? He executed an English king. Oliver Cromwell, there was the English Civil War between the Parliament and the King. King Charles, and the Church of England were battling against the Parliament. And the Parliament its support came from the cities, and the support of the support of the Church of England and the King came from the countryside and the rural folks. So in order to defeat the Cavaliers and the monarchists, the emerging capitalist class mobilized Protestant religious fanatics, Puritans, Roundheads, they were called, and built an army of religious fanatics to defeat the monarchy, and they were successful. And it was an upsurge of democratic participation. The printing press was new. Pamphlets were being distributed all over London, and people were reading and engaging with the notion of sovereignty and the right to vote, and you had Oliver Cromwell, and then you had the levelers, and you had the true levelers, and you had the diggers, and you had all kinds of kind of religious movements that were emerging that were critical of the Church of England, thought the Church of England was too Roman Catholic or too stodgy and conservative, and they were radicals and rabble rousers. And Oliver Cromwell comes out of that movement. He was a fanatical Puritan who built an army and was a very effective military leader and defeated the royalists and defeated the Cavaliers, and executed King Charles, and declared and became the Lord and Protector, the military dictator of England until he died. After he died, the monarchy was restored and his name became Mud. But as many historians have looked on, I mean, it was very key. I mean, you couldn't have torn apart feudalism in Britain, in England, without without Oliver Cromwell. That he was the revolutionary who brought capitalism to England, right? And he did it, he needed a fanatic, an extremist kind of, in order to mobilize and build an effective fighting force to defeat the nobility and the monarchy and the Church of England, right? You needed a rabble rouser, right? So he played a historical role. Now, he committed mass genocide against the Irish people, and he was, a brutal authoritarian. So I'm again, nuance, people, nuance. I'm not saying Oliver Cromwell was good. I'm saying that at the time he played a somewhat progressive historical role, despite the fact that he did a lot of evil things, right? Oliver Cromwell, he very much brought capitalism to England, right? And ripped apart feudalism. And that, again, we need to stop thinking of these things and was he a good guy, was he a bad guy? I don't know, I never met him, right? Apparently he was a little bit of a, he's one of those people, you get the impression when you read about Oliver Cromwell that he was one of those people that's just a little bit too serious. Like, I don't think I would ever try to tell a joke to Oliver Cromwell. If you walked up to Oliver Cromwell and said, "Hey, Oliver Cromwell, why did the chicken cross the road?" He would have looked at you like, he was just one of those people that was like too serious. That's the impression, right? There's the famous quote of when they painted him, right? They painted his face, and he insisted that they put the warts on his face because he thought that the warts were a very important part of his face, right? And he said, warts and all, right? He insisted that the guy who painted him put the warts on his face. Usually when they painted people, they worked very hard to make them look a lot, prettier than they actually were. Oliver Cromwell would have none of that. He wanted warts and all. And he was a very serious person. He did not believe in eating Christmas dinner. He did not believe in dancing. He did not believe in drinking. He was very, 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 very serious. And he was very, very religious. And, kind of an angry dude, I guess. But there you go. But at the same time, you needed like a fanatic basically to bring capitalism to England. You needed, a mobilization of kind of a fanatical fighting force, so there you go. Oliver Cromwell. Yeah, I mean, what is there to say about him? I don't know. I mean, he was the guy that mobilized the capitalists and the urban folks to defeat the Cavaliers. So there you go. All right, the English Civil War. Okay, there we go. Next question. All right, debunk socialism failed in Africa. What country had the highest life expectancy on the African continent prior to 2011? Socialist Libya. Argument debunked. Next question. No, I'm just kidding. Well, there's other things too, right? You can talk about the achievements of, Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe's economic achievements in terms of land redistribution, in terms of, wiping out illiteracy in Zimbabwe. You can talk about how, the African National Congress and the Communist Party of South Africa defeated apartheid. You can talk about, the infrastructure, how Julius Nyerere, he brought railroads to Tanzania and raised a lot of people out of poverty. There's many examples of socialism having successes in Africa. Probably the most blatant example of success of socialism in Africa comes from Libya, the Islamic Socialist government of Libya, raising people out of poverty, the highest life expectancy, building the world's greatest, the biggest, building the world's biggest, what do you call it? The world's biggest irrigation system, the Great Man-Made River. The achievements of socialism in Libya are vast, but there's been achievements, and now it's actually China, and it's China with their Belt and Road Initiative. Oh, look, Angola, right? Angola, there's been great achievements, right? Since 2002, when the Civil War ended, while the oil prices were high, Angola had the highest rate of economic growth in the world, right? The MPLA, the socialist government, with its state-run oil company, cooperating with Cuba. There's Cuban military folks there advising them. Chinese corporations went in there. They said Angola starts now. They gave millions of people their first job. I mean, that's amazing. It's amazing. It's utterly amazing. I'm sorry. Socialism has done a lot of amazing things in Africa. Meanwhile, the countries in Africa where you see look, Nigeria is a free market country in Africa. Crisis of malnutrition right now. Even though they're the top oil exporter now that Libya has been destroyed, they're having a crisis of malnutrition all over the country. I mean, Kenya, my goodness, right? I mean, there's many countries throughout Africa where free market neoliberal economics has just destroyed them. Meanwhile, Libya raised living standards. Angola has raised living standards. I mean, people don't know what they're talking about when they say that. Yeah. All right. How can I affect change living in a small city? Start a reading group, my friend. That is my advice. Order some copies. I can give you a bulk rate. If you send me an email, I'll have them shipped to you. I'll give you a bulk rate for the CPI educational manual. Start a reading group. Start a reading group. Find a couple people in the neighborhood. Maybe put an ad in the local paper or on the town, newsletter or something like that. Start a reading group for We Are City Builders. That is my advice. Start a reading group and start discussing that book with people in the area. Start a reading group for We Are City Builders, CPI Educational Manual. That's my advice. Will the CPI put out a study manual more focused on economics? I would love to do that. That's a great idea. We just need to put it together. We need to write it, right? We need to write it. But yes, the idea is that there will be many study manuals from the CPI. Right now we are using We Are City Builders, but the hope is that we will have many different study manuals for that purpose, right? There you go. Howie Hawkins and the Green Party, are they real leftists? Well, the Green Party has many different factions within it. There are many different factions. Jill Stein is not a socialist or a leftist. Howie Hawkins is a Trotskyite. He's part of the Solidarity, which is kind of like Solidarity, which is like a Trotskyist, loose association. It's, a Trotskyist group. There's many different factions within it, but it's this kind of like Trotskyist coalition. They run labor notes. I know Howie Hawkins has worked within the Teamsters Union and within Teamsters for a Democratic Union. He's a Trotskyite, right? So are Trotskyites real leftists? Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, they're not communists in my view. They're whatever. I mean, that's Howie Hawkins. But, there's Maoists in the Green Party. There's different factions, and Jill Stein is more of the kind of like social democratic liberal type, and then, at one point Ralph Nader was the candidate of the Green Party, and he was very much not, he was in favor of going back to small businesses and breaking up big monopolies. That was his theory. He was opposed to any kind of socialist state ownership, and anti-China talking points were one of his main, feelings was that China was the main threat, and the USA should focus on hurting China as a big Ralph Nader thing. So, the Green Party is a very broad coalition in the United States. It's a very broad coalition. In Germany, the Green Party is very different. In Germany, the Green Party has a much more solid base and much more seats in government. But the Green Party of the United States it's kind of like, there's the Libertarian Party, there's the Constitution Party, and there's the Green Party. Those are the three third parties that are, bigger than most of the other ones, right? That are, beyond the Democrat and Republican Party, Libertarian Party, Green Party, Constitution Party. Those are considered to be a little more serious than, all the other tiny little parties. But, the Green Party, I voted for Cynthia McKinney when she ran for president in 2008. I voted for her. I like Cynthia McKinney a lot. She was their presidential candidate in 2008. So there you go. All right. Why are anarchists serving U.S. hegemony? Anarchists are serving U.S. hegemony because of the fact that that the USA is trying to destabilize and create chaos around the world. I don't want to get into the Israel thing tonight. I actually have to go, so I'm gonna end this here. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. No need to apologize, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. The danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.